Somewhere under this grass is a Roman cemetery containing the remains of soldiers from all over the empire who were stationed here in South Shields. We know it's here because Victorian builders found loads of bodies. The fort was in use for 300 years, so the cemetery could be huge. And it's not just full of your average Roman squaddies. There were troops from Spain and Africa. There's even an intriguing reference to what could be a unit of Iraqis. There's just one tiny problem. The whole thing is under a housing estate. And we've got just 3 days to try and crack it. The Victorian builders are a tough act to follow. They found some amazing stuff, like this. Right in the middle of our site, they unearthed 2 of the finest Roman tombstones in Britain. One was put up by a Syrian for his 30-year-old wife, Regina, a freed slave from southern Britain. The other was in memory of Victor, a 20-year-old North African and former slave, from his Spanish master. Roman South Shields was clearly a microcosm of the whole empire. Who were the people who would have manned this place?
Like most forts on the frontier, it's manned by provincials. These are people the Romans hired from all around the Roman world. They never based them in the provinces they came from. They took them off to do the dirty frontier long-term garrison work. And we know there were Gauls here. There were also Asturians, who were Spanish cavalry regiments. We also know that in the 4th century, there seemed to have been a unit of bargemen, probably from the Tigris area, which is roughly equivalent to modern Iraq.
Tigris bargemen? They must have been tired by the time they got here. But their services may have been useful here at the Roman fort of Arbea, which commanded a strategic location next to the North Sea and overlooking the mouth of the River Tyne. The fort was 4 miles east of Hadrian's Wall, the northern limit of the Roman Empire, and acted as its supply base. The first known fort was built in AD 160, though there was probably an earlier one. The fort's gatehouse has been reconstructed from the plan revealed by excavations. This test pit will be here in the middle of the estate. Others will be in an arc running up to Trench 2, which is being dug to look for the northern boundary of the cemetery. But the first indications aren't hopeful. Phil's come down onto concrete where we might have expected the demolition rubble of Victorian houses. And Bridget's bogged down in modern services, gas, water and electricity pipes. Children at the local Hadrian Junior School are also going to be digging test pits. John Gator is looking for targets for them. Because the school's right next to the fort, it's likely that they might find traces of the vicus, or civilian settlement, that surrounded all Roman garrisons. You know how in the cowboy films you've got the fort and then outside it you've got all these old shacks full of Indians and whores and drunken doctors? Do you reckon that's what it would have been like outside a Roman fort?
Yeah, pretty much. The Roman army on campaign pushing forward the frontier has a whole baggage train of prostitutes and wives and children and their booty, and a series of huts and shacks would grow up around every kind of fort.
But actually here on Hadrian's Wall it seems to have been different. The forts are a lot more permanent, and as soon as the forts become permanent, the towns become much more permanent, much more organised. If you were standing here outside South Shields in the 2nd century, you'd see a paved street of the vicus with stone-built houses, shop fronts opening onto the street where the soldiers could buy everything they might want, workshops behind. Some of the soldiers who were married would have houses, there'd be inns for travellers, and even beyond that you'd then have temples, you'd have a religious area, and beyond that a cemetery. So it's a whole thriving community, but really quite established, well-ordered and well-run.
The population of the vicus and the fort might have been more than 1,000. During the 300-odd years of the fort's life, thousands of people would have died in Arbea. They must have been buried somewhere. We're looking to see how far a Roman cemetery extends under this housing estate in South Shields. So far, we've found medieval plough soil in our first trench and a 20th century vehicle inspection pit in our second. But we haven't written off this area, and we're opening Trench 3 nearby to look for the northern limit of the cemetery. Trench 4's looking for burials near Stuart's Roman Road. But the finds aren't what we expected. Instead of evidence of dead people, we're getting traces of occupation where people lived.
Oh, well, it's obvious that's Gaulish Samian ware, imported from Roman Gaul. And I can tell straight away this is a very rare form. You know those mortaria, those Roman kitchen mixing bowls?
With the grits inside.
That's right, for grinding up the food. Very characteristic of Roman cooking. This is a very rare Samian form of mortarium. It's got a kind of vertical wall round the edge here with a very characteristic little lion's head spout on one side, and then the bowl down here with the grits. You can actually see some of the grit there. It's not the sort of thing I'd expect to find in a grave, though. I think that's occupational debris.
I mean, I've been talking to Tim about it, and we agree it definitely looks like some sort of occupation deposit.
It does. I mean, it's a thick deposit, a whole range of material in it, and there's even got coal in it.
Well, you see, they've always really placed the vicus up further towards the fort, haven't they, on the west side of it? That looks like we've now found evidence for it stretching further down
here as well. Yeah.
With the vicus appearing to stretch further south than previously thought, the Roman map of South Shields is being redrawn. That's all very well, but where are the burials? Carenza's approaching the problem from a different angle. She's also going over exactly what archaeologists here at South Shields have found in test pits previously dug around the estate. At least the children in the local junior school near the fort have got some archaeology in theirs.
Do you think you're actually into Roman layers here?
No.
No, why not?
We haven't really found anything. We found some slate.
Oh, and that pottery is quite modern, isn't it? This is probably Victorian as well. We need to try and get below all of that and just see if we've got Roman even further down, because that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe this. You only had a couple of pieces before lunch.
In Trench 4, Phil's flow of finds has turned into a flood. But the story is still settlement, not cemetery.
I mean, look at this. We got loads of Samian. That's probably my favourite. It's nicely decorated.
Actually, it's not that wonderful, you know. If you look at the rosettes, they're very worn down, and it's got that rather smudgy orange colour. I think this is East Gaulish, you know, late 2nd century, early 3rd century. It's come across from the Rhineland.
Well, they're notable for their crappy Samian.
Well, actually, they weren't very good at it, and it's not that. It's quite distinctive, actually, but it's a good date, though.
At last, one of our test pits is delivering Roman finds. The question is, could they be from burials?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Yes. Right, that's from a nice little piece of flagon. There's the main body, and then that's up to the rim. Unfortunately, without the handle or the proper rim, it's going to be very hard to date that, but that's guaranteed Roman period. Now, a flagon is the sort of thing you could get in a cremation burial as a grave good, but it's more likely that this is just a normal flagon from everyday use, part of everyday life in the vicus, really.
So just possibly a grave good. But we still have nothing that positively shows a cemetery. Trench 4 is becoming our hot trench. Not the roadside burials that Stuart expected, but instead signs of settlement in the form of a midden or rubbish dump. And now it's thrown up another surprise.
Nick, would you care to have a look at this? Incredibly compact, hard surface.
Wow, that is hard, isn't it? That's real metalling.
I mean, is this the sort of surface that you get from your Roman roads up here?
Yes, it looks Roman to me, given the amount of Roman material we've had off the top of it.
Oh, it's there. It's there. It's there. There it is. Oh, God, it's still going.
A Roman road, another sign of life where we expected to find death. It's becoming a real puzzle trying to work out what happened to all those people who must have died at Arbea. Were they all in one cemetery? Carenza's trying to find out whether the layout of other Roman fort sites can tell us why the cemetery here is so elusive. The answer may be both simple and devastating.
The problem is that the cemetery may well be a lot smaller and a lot more compact, and perhaps several cemeteries. What we may be hitting is the gaps in between. I think what we really need to do from the archaeological point of view is start as close as possible to any spot where we know we've had human remains in the ground.
But that's the exact opposite of what Tim told us the strategy was at the beginning. He said start wide out and work in.
And it hasn't worked.
OK.
Well, I think we should start working in from the known and work out.
Is there anywhere that we know of where there are remains in situ?
Point H on the map here, where there was a small rescue excavation which did encounter Roman cremations and burials.
So Carenza's faction wants to dig here, Point H. It'll be very interesting to see what Tim thinks about that. We won't have to wait long for Tim's reaction. The day's drawing to a close.
This is where we've ended up. This is the last piece of green we have. This is what we've got to investigate.
But this is the one area I think we should be looking at as well, because under those bungalows is the one area where we found in situ skeletal human remains recently.
Carenza, is this the mysterious H?
That is H on the map that we talked about earlier. And we've actually got the end of a grave cut just here. So there's a really definite target to go for.
2 new trenches are planned. The first close to an earlier excavation which found part of a Roman burial. 20 metres away, geophys are surveying our second target. A previous test pit here found part of a curving ditch which could have ringed a Roman barrow burial. We want to find out if it did. The only problem is we know that the area's packed with gas, water and electricity service pipes. What about over here?
Well, down here, where we had highest hopes of finding a burial, more services.
So what are we going to do?
We've got one chance, I think. This is the geophysics we've now extended. They're the trenches. Look at that, that stands out like a sore thumb. We can't ignore that. It might only be more Victorian cellars, but given the circumstances, we've got to go for it.
Perhaps it is one option and it's just down here, but I haven't given up over here.
We've still got lots of services, though.
Well, there are services, but there's a gap. Just up here, right on the edge of the site.
What, from the edge of this pavement down to this orange line? Tim, that is an act of desperation.
Absolutely not. We've got this trench we're going to put in here, and we're going to go down there.
Where the pegs are, we've marked it out.
Well, we'll have dug up the whole estate then, won't we?
Pretty much, but that's the way it goes.
Flipping heck. So 2 new trenches are going in. One to investigate John's anomaly, and the other as close to Point H as we can get. But it feels like desperation. We're no longer looking for a cemetery, we're looking for a single grave. And our best bet may still be the possible barrow burial in Trench 7, even though it's been damaged by services. Tim, I remember the night before we started, there you were, first time that you'd run a time team dig. Mm-hmm. And what you were worried about was how we were going to process this wealth of archaeology which was going to gush up out of the earth as soon as you put a trench in.
Yep, and it's been rather different, hasn't it?
Why?
I think it's because the land surface we see now is very different from the Roman underlying surface, and we didn't realise how variable the geology was. You know, sand this deep in one place, clay in natural hollows, gullies and things that we didn't imagine were going to be there at all.
But this is quite interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is, because in fact the archaeology in here, although it's not symmetry, I think is beginning to make me feel we can tie it all together.
In what way?
Well, underneath that midden, you know, the rubbish deposit that Phil found yesterday, we discovered a cobbled path, which I think Phil's glorified with the name of a road. It's not what you'd call Grade 1 standard major Roman roads, but it's still a path, and it's on this particular alignment leading down towards the known burials. And that makes me excited, because I think we're getting the idea of a path leading towards the burials.
Why do you say you're beginning to be able to tie everything together?
Well, because we found these same cobbles in the next trench down, even closer to the cemetery.
Bridget's Trench?
Absolutely, yeah.
So this pathway thing is heading through that trench and on to Carenza's glorious Point H?
Absolutely, that's what we think, yeah. And what's more, we've discovered something new in the last half an hour, which I think makes that idea even more positive.
Tell me.
Well, you can see the road, or rather what's left of it, down here. But we've just discovered a ditch on the same alignment towards the far side, running through the yellow sand, that grey band. The previous excavation that did find burials was defined by ditches on exactly this alignment. And I think we found the edge of their cemetery plot.
A grave would be fantastic news. And there's more good news from the children of the local junior school, who've produced an impressive haul of finds from their test pits.
They've actually found a lot of Roman pottery, considering what a small area has been opened up.
They've done very well indeed, they really have.
Can you give them an idea of what was going on in the Roman period on this spot from what they found?
Well, I can see straight away there's a really nice little collection of Roman kitchenware. This is the kind of material that was used every day in a Roman kitchen. It would pick up contaminants from the food and they'd throw it away on a fairly regular basis, much as we would throw away paper plates, polystyrene containers, that sort of thing. This is the kind of material that would have been used in the houses in the Vicus, where the families of the soldiers who lived in the fort were having their ordinary everyday lives.
When I left, all we had was this Roman road surface. Now you've got this whacking great slot cut through it. What archaeology have you found in it?
We found that underneath the road surface we have this great massive dump of clay, about a foot deep.
That's this stuff here?
That's been put there to build the road. Underneath that clay we've got the natural sand, so we're really out at the bottom there. And cut through that, at this end of the trench, we've got this small pit full of grey soil and charcoal.
Is there any cremated bone coming out of that?
We can't see any yet with the naked eye. We have got one big bit of bone, which is in that tray there.
Where did this come from?
It's from a level which is much nearer the level of the road surface.
Well, is it human?
I think it probably
Human?
is.
Which bit of the body?
It looks like a chunk of upper arm from quite a chunky arm as well.
But to be sure...
The possible cremation pit turned out to be a prehistoric feature, but the human bone shows there was a burial nearby. 20 metres away, Bridget's Trench has also finally produced intriguing evidence that we are close to the cemetery. Ditches on the right alignment, and now, what could be even more positive, bone.
The question is, what sort of bone? It's in such awful condition. It's certainly not cremated bone. I mean, it's mostly from long bones, but my goodness, it's the consistency of toothpaste.
Yeah, it's just rotten, it's falling apart.
This is obviously why we're not recovering any skeletons here, isn't it? This soil's so acidic that bone's just decaying. There is nothing there that's recognisable as anything that's either specifically animal or specifically human.
Whether or not it's human, we now know that we're close to the cemetery, or one of them. It was small and couldn't have held all of Arbea's dead, so there must have been other cemeteries. This one was prominently placed crowning a hill with access along Phil's track. We now also know that the Vicus stretched further down than previously thought, forming the northern boundary. The main road south from the fort was the eastern limit. To the south, there was marshy ground unsuitable for burials. It would be 3rd century or earlier, before the Roman Empire converted to Christianity, and burial became the preferred funeral practice. Well, one thing we can say about this estate is it's pretty well stocked with gas, water and electricity pipes, most of which we found in our trenches. But with the help of South Shields residents and school kids, we've managed to unpick the story of a Roman cemetery from this maze of buildings and concrete. And I think that's a bit of a result.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
This is Piercebridge on the River Tees, and you can see exactly why we might want to come here. The entire village is inside one of the most fascinating Roman forts in the country. But that's all over there. The reason we're here is to find out what's going on down there. Over the last 20 years, 2 local divers have pulled more than 2,000 objects out of this stretch of the Tees, like this lovely figurine and this little fish here, beautiful gold ring. And intriguingly, all of it came from one little area in the middle of the river. And on top of that, they think they found the remains of a couple of wooden bridges. So what does that fort up there have to do with all this down here? The whole place is a riddle. Let's hope we can get to the bottom of it. Did you make these?
I did. I got my Blue Peter badge for it as well. This is the modern bridge now with the road bridge. We found this structure with the oak piles up here.
You think that's a bridge?
We think it is because we've got a concrete pier there. We're not too sure if it's Roman or medieval. We're not too sure. Down here, we've got all the wooden piles and there's a wooden platform there. So the mystery is what's going on here.
Ben, we've got a shed load of finds, we've got the fort, we've got bridges. What on earth do we do?
There's a lot to be getting on with, isn't there?
So we're not just going to be messing around in the river all the time?
No, obviously we will be in the river. That's hugely important to get in there and get recording that. But we're also going to be having a look at this context up on the banks and around about. There's plenty of stuff to explore up there as well.
So we know about the fort and the big Roman stone bridge that spanned the Tees here. But there are two mysteries Bob and Rolf want us to resolve. First, why have they found so many objects in the middle of the river? And second, what are the wooden structures on the river bed? Have they found two more bridges? Or are they jetties or some sort of water mill? There's only one way to find out.
What I do want to do is get to the end of this timber just to give myself some idea of the size of this thing.
It's only when you're up close that you start to appreciate the scale of whatever this thing was. These beams are clearly enormous, and if they're Roman, then they've been lying here on the bottom of the river for the past 2,000 years.
That's a good width. You could drive a modern lorry over that. And it's probably wider than that then.
Oh, it is. Well, this disappears into the silt. It's going to be a lot longer.
That is incredible. And it's all one continuous piece of timber.
Good old English oak, Phil.
Fantastic.
And what about the other enigma we've come here to resolve? Why this vast hoard of Roman objects was found on the riverbed? Philippa, I know you've only just started cataloguing the stuff with Bob and Ralph, but are you getting any kind of picture of what was happening here?
Well, there's just so much to look at, but what I can tell you is that there's some really interesting things going on at the site. For a start, there seem to be a lot of religious objects amongst what we're finding here.
Religious, so these could be votive offerings, things that people just chuck in the river for the gods?
Exactly right. And it looks like all these objects are coming from a very small area in the river, about 4 metres by 14 metres. So I think people were deliberately throwing stuff into just one small area.
But Phil, look what I picked up.
It's the shoe off one of those piles. Beautiful. I mean, this is the actual tip that was driven into the riverbed. We've got this lovely piece of wrought iron hammered right out. And then this piece up here, and you can actually see the imprint of the wood preserved in the corrosion.
Alongside the timber beams, we've now found one of the iron spikes used to anchor them into the riverbed. Whatever this thing was, it was formidable. But we've still got the other set of wooden remains to look at further upriver. It's just as well I brought my flippers.
Loaded away. Yeah, whoa, it's a little bit cold. Slightly.
All right, enough of this faffing about. Let the professionals through. There are no horizontal timbers this time, just the remains of a wooden post. It's quite narrow at the top with a sort of notch in, isn't it?
It's narrow at the top, but it broadens down this time. They're quite substantial. These are big posts. That's a big post, that.
Let's have a look at the second one.
Look at this one, yeah?
In fact, Bob and Rolf have found 7 posts in 2 parallel rows. And then there's this massive lump of concrete. Could this be what's left of a pier?
You
you think it could be Roman?
I think there's every chance it could be, yeah. There's a lot like a bridge or a jetty or something. I mean, those posts are big and big lumps of concrete.
It's quite extraordinary. We've got some substantial remains over there, which we think might have been part of a big Roman bridge. Phil thinks he's got a second Roman bridge over there. We seem to have another bridge here. This site's getting curiouser and curiouser. Here at Piercebridge in County Durham, where we're getting to grips with what we think might be the remains of 3 Roman bridges in the River Tees. But while most of us have our eyes firmly fixed on what's happening on the riverbeds down here, over here, what looks like a breakaway faction of rebel archaeologists appears to be opening a trench in a field that even more bizarrely is nowhere near the river.
So, John, where are we on this geophys then?
I think we've got a little rectangular building here.
Yeah.
It's on a different alignment to the fort, so we're going from the middle, across the wall, possible ditch outside.
Yeah.
I have 2 big questions about this site. Firstly, why are we excavating this little field when the river's actually about 200 metres in that direction? But secondly, and probably more importantly, what on earth is Mick Aston doing here? Mick wasn't scheduled to be on this dig. Ben's in charge, not you.
Yep.
You don't like Roman archaeology, and yet you wheedled your way into it.
Yeah, well, it's because it's County Durham and it's the Tees Valley. And we've done quite a lot of sites in this area already. And I'm interested in where this fits in to the overall picture, because we're very near Stanwick, which is a big prehistoric complex. And we're in the Tees Valley, where we've got Gainford and Barnard Castle from the medieval period.
Do you see that, John? The reason he's here has got nothing to do with the Romans at all. He's interested because of what might have preceded the Romans and what came after them.
Yeah.
But Ben, you're interested in the Romans.
Definitely interested in the Romans, yeah. And the reason why we're here is because there's been a lot of excavation around Piercebridge. Wonderful tome here, you know, you just feel the weight of it, a huge amount of excavation. But it's all taken place over there to the east. Loads of buildings, some sort of village-like settlement over there, but no one's actually been over here on the west side. Have we got a small village just contained over there? Have we got something much larger, something like a small town?
Mick, do you think whatever we find here might help us illuminate what's going on down at the river?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this has never been looked at. So...
well, it has been now.
Except for this morning with you, Dean. Yeah, but, so we don't know what's here, really.
Well, we do. We're starting to get a really exciting picture, I think. We've surveyed it magnetically. You can see the corner of the fort. It shows really clearly. And then we've got a mass of anomalies extending across the field.
Do you think all this here might be human activity rather than just geology?
I'm sure it is. When you look at the detail, some of the ditches are on the same alignment as the fort, but others are clearly on a differing alignment. What I think we may have is an earlier settlement and that the fort has been slapped on top of it.
Naomi? Yeah? You've got a little bit of bone here. Presume that's animal bone. I think there's, is that some kind of butchery mark on
That's
there?
definitely a butchery mark. It's a rib from a large mammal, such as like a horse or a cow. So yeah, evidence of butchery.
The good news is we've found evidence there was human activity next to the fort. The bad news is we don't know when. Though it looks like we might be getting a date from the river. So what do you think, Meg?
It's wooden, but it's not got that many rings in it. There's only about 30 in this piece, and I need 50 plus.
So can you do anything with it?
Not with this one, but we're going to try and sample more of the timbers that's down there.
If you do find a piece that's got 50 or more rings in, will you be able to date it for us before the end of our 3 days?
Yes, if I can find the right sample.
Meanwhile, I don't know what John had with his cornflakes this morning, but he's already finished geophysics in this field. We were hoping he might pick up traces of any roads running down to meet our bridges.
There's your bridge, Ben, cutting through here. There's no sign in my data of a sort of road going on a north-south alignment. I mean, clearly we've got lots of responses. We've got these very, very strong ditch-like responses, but there, in the middle of the field there, where the sheep are, we've not gone quite as far as your bridge yet, Phil, but at the moment, we're not really answering all the questions.
I'm not quite so worried. This is good stuff. There's great anomalies there. Maybe this is a roadside ditch. It's just that the road has to curve round to take this steep incline down to the river.
So, even though there's no trace of one, Ben's convinced there is a road here somewhere. So we're going to open a third trench to try and find it. Not that we're clutching at straws. Back in Phil's trench, there's no sign of any road, but he has made a remarkable discovery.
I've got this fragment of skull in there. Is this a grave? I just need your confirmation. That is human.
Yeah, that's no problem. Just by looking at it, you've got this nice uniform thickness, and that is just screaming at me that is definitely human.
Because look, what else I found? I was just...
Aha!
Look, that's a piece of a very small shell bracelet.
That is lovely.
Stuart thinks he's found another road running down to Ben's Bridge back on the other side.
This is getting really exciting from my point of view because what we're seeing is a link back to Stanwix Hill Fort, which is 3 kilometres down the road. Biggest Iron Age hill fort in this part of the world, major tribal centre. It's 320 hectares. It's a huge, huge site. But the really interesting thing that relates to is this routeway. It links Stanwix right down to Piercebridge here and heads towards where we've got the string line across the river and where there are some timbers in the riverbed.
So there's an outside chance that the piles themselves are prehistoric and not Roman.
It would be really nice if they were, wouldn't it? I mean, that'd be marvellous.
This is terrific. John may have picked up Deer Street on Geophys. Now Stuart reckons he's identified an older prehistoric road running all the way up to Ben's Bridge here. So is the bridge also prehistoric? To answer that, we need a tree ring date. Though poor old Mick looks like he's still struggling.
The problem is, I float and I can't get down deep enough to cut it. So I'm going to bring my stunt double in here, Bob. So Bob's going to have to go in there and do it. So basically I need to get as low as you possibly can.
Further downstream, we're getting more fantastic finds. Wait.
Oh, hi.
Oh, let's have a look.
Ah.
Oh.
Gee. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful, isn't it? What do you think that is precisely?
Oh, well, we've got a very nice copper alloy pin there. Bronze to you and me. But it must be a hairpin of some description. Look, there's a little sort of piercing through the middle, but with this glass bead on the end. I think this is interesting about this is it means women. It must mean women. Yeah. And of course the Roman army is followed around by all sorts of women. Some wives, but also women of certain reputations only too happy to help those soldiers spend their earnings.
Stuart, where does all this water come from?
Well, from the river, obviously.
Yes, thank you very much.
Look, this river goes, we've got a 30-mile run that way, right up into the mountains and moorlands in Cumbria. It might only rain for half an hour here, but it's been raining for 2 or 3 days up there. It comes in literally waves, it builds up in torrents. And it's not just the power of the water that erodes the banks and bridges, it's the boulders and cobbles it brings with it. There's loads of them deposited down there, they're that big. Can you imagine them hitting the bridge, weakens the structure? After a while, you're going to get sick of repairing these timber bridges and so on. So let's build a nice big stone pier bridge over there that's going to last for generations. That's why you have to kind of react to that sort of power of the river.
The divers who invited us here gave us 2 objectives, didn't they? One was to sort out the bridges, or the remnants of them, which we found in the river. But the other was to solve the mystery of all these finds in the river. Yeah. Are we going to be able to meet those objectives?
I think we're nearly there. We've got a bit more work to do up on the banks, and then, you know, hopefully that will give us more... I'm confident it will give us more of an idea about what's actually going on in the river.
It might not be a raging torrent, but the strength of the current makes working out here far too dangerous. It's frustrating, certainly, but it does at least demonstrate the destructive power of the river, which we decided last night must have undermined the north bank here, causing a great chunk of the cliff to collapse into the water, taking part of the Roman town with it. It's hard to imagine a more dramatic episode in the history of Piercebridge. Hang on, this is disastrous. If we can't get dates from the bridges, we've got no chance of telling the story of this place. On top of that, our radar survey hasn't worked either.
And the problem is that there's so many big boulders down there that the energy's hitting those, it's bouncing back up off them, and we're not getting the penetration that would answer that question.
Right, so it's the energy of the radar as well, but this is about the energy of the river as well. It's transported all those boulders, strewn them across the bottom, and it's stopped us from looking at the archaeology.
That's it, yeah.
It looks like the mystery of the bridges will remain unresolved, although there is one small glimmer of hope up on the escarpment. Faye, you've just about finished here, haven't you?
Yes, we have. I mean, we've found what we came to look for. We've got our Roman road, Deer Street.
It's really vivid in the landscape there, isn't it?
It looks fantastic, doesn't it? And actually, we also have our ditches on the other side. So we've got one there and one coming in over there as well.
And of course, this street, Deer Street, goes slap bang to our middle bridge, doesn't it?
Exactly, and that's what must date it, because that's when the Romans conquer the north.
So give us a date.
The big Roman push into the north is in the 70s and early 80s AD.
Terrific, we've found Deer Street. Better still, it lines up exactly with our middle bridge here. So we think they must have been constructed at the same time, in the late 1st century AD.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
As soon as you walk onto this field, you know there was something big, important and Roman here. The ground's littered with box tile, roof tile, high-status pottery and countless other classic examples of Roman occupation. It's no wonder that over the last century this site has been surveyed, field-walked and written about many times. But it's only been dug once, in the 1920s, when an amateur archaeologist called Samuel Winbolt identified it as the site of a station. An official complex of buildings used by the great and the good as they journeyed up and down the country. We may disagree with Winbolt about his description of the Mancio as an officer's quarters, but this classics teacher was a very good archaeologist for his time, and locking his results into the landscape and re-evaluating his work will give us a great start.
Ah! Oh, what's that?
What is it?
That's the trouble, we don't know what the quality of the floor was that Winbolt said he found. I mean, if it was a nice floor, or whether it was just these broken up bits of tile.
But the archaeologists have also identified a second target. Winbolt's records describe the Mancio as being surrounded by massive enclosure ditches. And Neil's keen to investigate these as soon as possible, because when it comes to getting dates for a site, ditches are an archaeologist's best friend.
I mean, I wonder, as a first starter for 10, whether this isn't actually going to be the natural bedrock. In which case, our building, and I think we can start to talk about a building because there's just so much demolition rubble, there's all tile, bits of tiles and what have you. That's in there. The other thing I like about it, that edge, look at it, it's exactly at 90 degrees to the Roman road.
Yeah.
I like the look of that.
But it's a bit early to break out the champagne. We may have our first piece of Mancio, but we don't know what piece it is or how it might help John decipher his abundant geophys results. To be honest, we don't even know which part of Winbolt's excavation this is. Only time and a lot more digging will tell how this small wall line fits into the bigger picture of Roman Alfoldean, a settlement that stretched along both sides of Stane Street.
Ah, now we're talking.
Is this the natural ear then, this stuff?
That's it. So that's the outside of the site. So we now know where we are.
Over in Trench 2, Rakshar and Matt have located the Mancio's enclosure ditches, or at least one of the ditches. Well, to be more precise, they found one side of one ditch. Why have you extended this?
Well, because we couldn't find an edge. You see, we thought the edge of the ditch was going to be about here, Tony.
Hang on, let's have a look over here. So this is...
See how soft that is? That's really soft, isn't it?
Yeah, let me get my trowel into that, no problem.
Yeah.
So this is fill. We're on top of a ditch here, and we couldn't find the edge of the ditch where we thought it should be.
It's that?
Absolutely.
It is this?
Yeah. So this is the actual natural undisturbed bedrock.
Yeah.
So we can work our way back the trench that way.
The problem is, the geophys results suggest that each ditch is at least 4 metres wide and possibly up to 4 metres deep. We'll be lucky to get to the bottom of them by the end of day 3. The size of these ditches and the half-kilometre of settlement geophys are now investigating shows Alfoldean was a major focus of Roman activity in West Sussex. About 11 o'clock this morning, Neil decided to put a tiny little discreet trench in here to see if he could find the ditch which would have once gone round the Mancio. But he couldn't see it, so he extended the trench, then he extended it again, then you extended it again and again. Was all this work really necessary?
Totally, Tony. Look, here is the ditch.
Hooray!
Look, it's very soft fill, very black, full of fines. Now, just behind Ratcha, we get a change. Ratcha, can you just point out where we see the change in the earth?
Yeah, this is the lighter colour. The ditch is actually cutting into this. It's going down that way.
So one edge of the ditch there, and another ditch just there.
Where does that go to?
Well, who knows? I mean, perhaps over about as far as here.
So we're going to extend back to here as well?
We'll see how time goes, but come this way, Tony, because
right.
this is really interesting. So
Yeah.
think one ditch, think 2 ditches.
Yeah.
And then look, here we have, look at, very different. Yellowy clay. This must be the rampart bank inside the 2 outer ditches.
In this trench, we've got this wonderful floor, which for the first time in this trench means we've got intact archaeology.
Do you reckon this looks classy enough to be the officers' quarters?
Well, it's what Wimble called the officers' quarters, but forget the officers' quarters. You know, he's living in a fantasy world. This is part of the Mancio. This must be part of what he referred to as the pink corridor. So we know more or less where we are, but tomorrow the real challenge is going to actually work out the exact plan of the Mancio, because that will be a real achievement.
Or not. Just as we prepare for a manic afternoon of trenching, the heavens open and the clear wall lines of the Mancio and the obvious circularity of the circular feature disappear under a sea of muddy clay. Phil, we've dug in much worse weather than this, and even when everyone else has packed up, we've had to prise you out of the trench. So how come you've stopped?
It's so simple, it's a geology.
What do you mean?
Well, this ground here has just got so much clay in it that as soon as it starts to rain, it just puddles up. There's just no way it's going to drain away.
We've hatched a plan to buy us a few extra hours digging on this rain-sodden site. We're going to cover Phil's trench with this tent and use a digger to expose clean, dry archaeology in Miles's trench. Unfortunately, the conditions in the ditch trench make it too dangerous to dig, so at most we've only one more day to get to the bottom of it. But although we still don't have a date for these defences, Stuart thinks he now knows why they were constructed.
This is about control. If you want to go up and down this road, you have to go in one gate, out the other gate and over a bridge. It's about Roman imperial taxation. It was a way of easily generating revenue to support the army. In fact, I'm just quoting from some original sources here where regulations for taxes per capita. For each slave, 1.5 denarius for a horse, mare, jackass, mule, donkey, ox, half a denarius, and so on. If it moved, they taxed it. In effect, those defensive earthworks are it's like a big bonded warehouse, if you can put it like that.
Bridget, what have you done with the circularity?
It seems to have disappeared altogether.
Yeah.
When the machine is clearing back, we'll be able to see the features very clearly. But of course, now we've got rain again.
Yeah.
Water starts pooling, and it just is phasing it out again. And you can see these guys out here working in it. We've got to get them out because it's just too
Yeah,
wet
they're
and claggy.
churning everything up, aren't they? Yeah, I think we ought to call it a day.
But it's not completely doom and gloom. Geophys have gallantly continued to survey this large waterlogged site, and John thinks a clear picture of Alfoldean's development is beginning to emerge. But it's getting late, so time to swap the cold, wet misery of the site for the cold, wet comfort of a pint. It was a frustrating afternoon, wasn't it?
Oh, very frustrating. This morning was going so well, and I thought, yeah, we can now see the walls, it can match it to John's geophysics. We're actually getting a plan of the Mancio. You know, we got the site on the run, but yeah, we've been held up for sure. What do you think, John?
Well, I think if we take one of these strong anomalies that I think is probably a pit, and then we'll hopefully get some dating evidence.
Yeah, and we can compare pottery from that with material from the ditch, from the bank, and from the Mancio. It's bit of a picture of how this site developed over time.
Are we actually going to be able to get inside the Mansio?
Oh, for sure. By tomorrow night, we'll know what a Roman bedroom in a hotel looks like.
Over the past 3 days, it's been a mausoleum, a Romano-British roundhouse, and then he lost it completely.
Miles, is it still here?
It's come back again. My circularity has returned. We've got what looks like the circular gully swinging right the way around the trench. So I still like the idea of that being a half, that sort of burning area in the middle, and this being a circular all around it.
But it's all Roman.
Yeah, it's all Romano-British.
So it looks like Miles's early suspicions were right. This is a Romano-British roundhouse built by the locals and part of the original settlement that was here when the Mansio was built. But this trench refuses to be straightforward.
There's a complicating factor in that just outside that circular feature, Ian's found a series of other pits. What have you got down there, Ian?
I've got a broken, but it appears to be fairly complete pot just there.
What's just the outline?
God, I can see that, yeah. So that's the whole diameter of it, isn't it, there?
It looks like most of the pot. I mean, that's the fabric.
And you've got that sort of New Forest indented beaker.
I mean, that's useful, isn't it? Because that probably is going to be sort of 3rd century AD. So again, it shows the activity here outside the enclosure is contemporary with what's going on inside the enclosure. It's not earlier, it's contemporary.
We're also at last getting near to a story for the ditches that were at some point dug to separate and, we presume, protect the Mansio from the rest of the settlement.
Yep, here it is. You can see this huge, thick yellow clay of the rampart.
Yeah.
You can see this brown stuff here.
Yeah.
That's an earlier ground surface, and the rampart has been slapped straight on top of it.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that's coming from under the rampart.
This is the stuff that's been sealed by the bank.
It's just what we've been wanting, isn't it?
This is a classic piece of archaeological dating. Because when these ditches were dug into the clay, the spoil was used to build a large rampart, sealing any finds on the ground surface underneath.
Does look as though we got the corridor as we first thought. What we didn't know was that it was going to turn through 90 degrees and go that way.
So this is actually the internal southeast corner of the building.
Exactly.
And the whole of the south range now we can sort of plot from behind us.
Precisely. You're in the corridor, I'm in the courtyard.
We're now getting an idea of just how impressive John's results are. Because with the help of the archaeology, we can filter out much of the noise on his original geophys to give us this. The actual floor plan of the Alfoldean Mansio. An impressive 2-storey coaching inn, complete with its bathhouse. And at the heart of a complex with paddocks, stables, and all the other services a traveller would have expected. And we're now standing in one of the bedrooms. Right, I'm a weary traveller at the end of the day. I've pulled up into the Mansio. What do I get for my money?
You're a very important person, Tony. You would get a room to yourself, I'm sure. Good sized room, in your cum, imagine your bed, perhaps a brazier. If it's cold in winter, warm your hands, chest. You could then go out, perhaps have your dinner in the dining room, have a bath, and maybe a few alternative attractions, perhaps a few girls or something like that.
Fantastic. Did everybody get a room on their own?
Almost certainly not. I think it would have depended on your status. I mean, some of these rooms you could easily fit a number of bunk beds in, so you could be literally sleeping with 10 goat herds or something like that.
No, I'm high status.
Sorry, you'll have a single goat.
What's that?
This place lasted 150 years. Imagine how many people must have walked through the doors looking for a good night's sleep and a warm bath and a decent meal. There'd have been Roman soldiers and administrators and tax collectors and British traders all wandering through the rooms, admiring the mosaics, eating their food off the fine Samian ware and charging up their batteries for another day's journey down Stane Street. And quite frankly, after 3 pretty gruelling days in some fairly horrendous weather conditions, all of us will be only too glad to get back to the 21st century version of the Mansio, just as soon as we finished our feast.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.